Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. This is one of my favorite videos to record every single year because there's generally a lot of misconceptions and lack of understanding across the NBA community when it comes to the NBA draft lottery. So this entire video is going to break down the NBA draft lottery, the process, the way that they draw the ping pong balls, the way that they set the order, the way that they decide who's picking where, the way that the lottery itself actually functions, how to break tiebreakers, all of it and more is in this video. So I hope you guys do enjoy. Again, this is one of my favorite videos to record. We're going to have a lot of NBA draft content on the channel here over the next couple months before the NBA draft. So make sure you guys are subscribed. And like you can see on the graphic, we are using the 2023 NBA draft to show you how the draft lottery is actually going to play out. So without further ado, let's jump into it with the biggest misconception. This is the most important part of the video, which is why I put it right at the beginning. Now, if you're a nerd like me, you probably want to stick around to see everything else in the video when it comes to the process and how everything works. If you want to know all the ins and outs of the draft lottery, stick around. But this is the most important part, and this is most times when people get most confused about the lottery. This is not a lottery for all 14 picks. The NBA draft lottery is only for the first 4 picks of the draft. I'm going to say it again because it's the most important part. The NBA draft lottery is only for the first 4 selections of the draft. Picks 5 through 30 are then based on standings of the remaining teams that were not selected through the lottery. That is the beginning point. That is the most important point to know before we go through the rest of this video, so you can understand exactly how this lottery works. Again, the first 4 picks are done through the lottery. And to solve tiebreakers, the NBA flips a coin. As you can see here, this is actually an image representing the 1979 tiebreaker between the Chicago Bulls and Los Angeles Lakers for their draft pick that year. So in order to break ties, the NBA literally just flips a coin. You would think there's a better process, something a little less schoolyard esque, but that's literally how it works. So if 2 teams are tied for a certain draft spot, the NBA will flip a coin between the 2 teams, and whichever one it lands on is the team that gets the higher pick, the better pick, which you'll see a little bit later on in this video because there are a few ties this year, which is fun to talk about. So here's our lottery odds. Detroit has the number 1 odds. San Antonio and Houston are actually tied at 2 and 3, which we'll talk about what their tiebreaker will look like and why that's important. But then below them, we have Charlotte, Portland, Orlando, Washington, and Indiana are then tied at 7 and 8, which is a very important spot to be tied. Utah at 9, Dallas has the 10th best odds, OKC and Chicago, assuming they're both eliminated in the play-in. I am recording this before the play-in, so it's possible that one of those 2 teams, or potentially Toronto or New Orleans, could slip into the playoffs. If that happens, just substitute the lowest team with the team that missed. So for example, if say the Lakers or the Timberwolves miss the playoffs as examples, they would then substitute to 14 for New Orleans, and the other teams would bump up or stay the same depending on what team gets in. So now for the ties, the actual ties, this is, let's start there. Let's look at Oklahoma City and Chicago, for example, or actually let's go to Washington and Indiana at that 7-8 spot, because 7 is a very important spot in the draft, which we'll talk about later on. Washington, according to this chart right now, has a 6.8% chance at landing the first overall pick. Indiana has a 6.7% chance. The reason that those numbers are represented as such is because there's a tiebreaker. So they're giving them a 50-50 split here from this graphic. The real odds, once that tiebreaker is settled, is the team that has the 7th best odds. So if that's Indiana who wins the tiebreaker or Washington, they'll actually have a 7.5% chance, and Indiana will have a 6.0% chance. For Oklahoma City, at 1.8% would be 2.0%, and Chicago's would go down to 1.5%. Right now, they're splitting the difference between those because there is, 50-50 odds on that. For San Antonio and Houston, they actually have the same odds for top 4. As you can see, 14, 13.4, 12.7, 12.0. The whole point of that is the most important part here, which we're going to talk about where a team could potentially move to. Let's say, again, remember, picks 5 through 30 are done through standings at that point. Look at Detroit. The lowest they can possibly pick as the team with the worst standings, with the worst record, in the NBA is 5th overall. Because remember, only the top 4 picks are done through the lottery. So let's say Detroit gets very unlucky. They have a 52.1% chance of being in the top 4. But let's say, luck doesn't go their way. Detroit moves down to 5 because of standings. They possibly cannot be lower because they have the worst record in the league. For example, San Antonio and Houston, since they're tied with record, it's possible that whoever loses that, tiebreaker could potentially move down to pick 7, whereas the team that's second best odds could only move as low as 6, but their odds actually don't change because the top 3 teams in terms of lottery odds, the 3 worst teams in the NBA, all have the same chances in the lottery, which was part of Adam Silver's lottery reform in his time as commissioner, which I do think was a good change for the league. One of the few things Adam Silver, in my opinion, has done very well for the NBA. So let's go to a team. Let's talk about Dallas here, because there's been a lot of questions for me about Dallas. A lot of Mavs fans want to know what's the odds of them moving up for Victor Wembanyama. As you can see from this graphic, only a 3% chance to move up in the lottery to pick number 1. But pick number 2 is 3.3%, pick number 3 is a 3.6% chance, and then a 4.0% chance for the Dallas Mavericks to be picking 4th. So if you combine all of those, what's their chances of moving up in the lottery holistically? Well, you have to pull out a calculator. 3.0 plus 3.3, 6.3, plus 3.6, you get that number to 9.9, plus 4.0 is a 13.9% chance of moving up. But since OKC, Chicago, Toronto, New Orleans all have chances to move up as well, you have to take that into account and realize, well, shoot, there's a 66% chance that they could pick 9 if a couple of teams above them move down. But then you could also look at, the chance of, or at 10, if no teams move down. And then at 11, you see there's actually a 19.0% chance, because that's the combined chances of OKC, Chicago, Toronto, New Orleans moving up. So because of that pick, the reason it's highlighted in red is because it would convey then to the New York Knicks. Chicago, the top 4 pick, is protected for them, but remember that would become Orlando's if it does not move up into the top 4, and if Chicago does not make the playoffs this year, which Chicago, even if they make the playoffs, it will go to Orlando, but it wouldn't be part of the lottery then at that point. But you see 85% chance that it sticks there at pick number 12. Let's look at a team like Orlando here, who currently have the 6th best odds. They have a 9% chance to move up to number 1, but notice they don't have a shot at pick number 5. That is, again, because pick number 5 is done through the standings. Pick 1 through 4 through the lottery. So Orlando, 6th worst record, do not have a chance to move up in the seeding, whereas, or do not have a chance to move up to number 5. I hope this is making sense. I'm sure it is. But I just want to be thorough here in this part because it's one of the most important parts and one of the biggest misconceptions. It is possible for Orlando to move down below 6 because, again, if, say, Washington or Indiana or Utah or Dallas were to jump them, then you would see, the teams get bumped down by standings because that means one of the top 4 teams got bumped down. I hope this is making sense. It should be pretty clear on draft night or on draft lottery night. Let's say we're at pick number 9 and we hear Indiana called and not Utah. At that point, we know Utah jumped up into the top 4 because they were not listed 9th, if that makes sense. Going into the actual ping pong balls, this is what they look like. They're carried in a briefcase, and this is exactly how they are labeled. 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on until the number 14. There are no repeats. There are only 14 ping pong balls, which makes a lot of people question, well, how does this actually work? Don't worry, we're going to talk about that. Combinations. There's 1,001 different combinations for the NBA draft lottery. There is one null combination, and I've gotten a lot of questions about this. To be honest with you, I don't have a good explanation or reason as to why there is a null combination. But what a null combination is a series of 4 numbers that the NBA has designated as a do-over. As if this combination gets drawn, they will completely restart the lottery, which I do not know, again, why they do this, but it is part of the rules. It is part of the way that they've done it. It's been part of tradition. This is how the lottery has functioned since they switched over to the ping pong ball series instead of the old, frozen envelope that David Stern was famous for with Patrick Ewing. So they're selecting combos of 4 numbers. So for example, it could be 1, 7, 12, and 5. And then remember, only the top 4 picks are done through the lotto. Each team has multiple different combinations. And for an example here, let's look at Detroit's odds. Remember, 14% chance of that first overall pick. 14% of the 1,000 combinations is 140. So Detroit, for the first overall pick, they have 140 combinations that would get them Victor Wembanyama this year, which is obviously a decent number of combinations. Now, I'm sure they wish that number was much higher. In the old lottery system, it used to be 250 combinations for the worst team in the NBA. That got reduced down to 14%, which is 140 combinations. So let's talk about some examples of combinations. 1, 7, 12, and 5, for example. Again, this is not, set in stone. I don't have the combinations that the NBA is going to use this year, but that could represent the Orlando Magic. 1, 7, 12, and 4 could represent the Houston Rockets. Teams do not get to choose these. These are designated by the NBA before the NBA draft lottery. So we don't exactly know what combination is going to be for what. And then another example, 1, 7, 12, and 3 could, for example, be the Indiana Pacers. Notice how 1, 7, and 12 are in all of those combinations in that order, but that last number could really dictate and decide what team is picking Victor Wembanyama or not, which I think is a very great example to show how a team's franchise history could really come down to one ping pong ball, which is a very interesting way to run a league. Not sure if it's the way I would run a league, but it is a very interesting way to realize how the NBA draft lottery works, and especially when there's a franchise-changing player like this year with Victor Wembanyama, arguably 2, maybe 3 franchise-changing players this year, depending on how you look at the draft. It's a fun way to have the lottery run, but if you come out on the wrong side of the lotto, you're probably not super happy about it. So let's take a little bit further look at the odds. So again, like I said, Detroit 14% chance means you have 140 combinations, plus 140 for San Antonio, plus 140 for Houston. I'm getting that from that 14% of 1,000. You guys all should be seeing how this is working. Look at the table on the left, use the numbers on the right. 125 combinations for Charlotte because of a 12.5% chance. Portland has a 10.5% chance this year. Their tanking has put them in a very good spot in this year's draft lottery. You see 5th best odds overall, 10.5% chance to move up for Victor Wembanyama, 105 combinations that would represent them. Orlando has 90 combinations. And now this is where we get some of those tiebreaker numbers. Remember earlier I said Washington and Indiana, whichever one wins that, will have a 7.5% chance. They would have 75 combinations. Remember, our graphic is not fully updated because the tiebreakers have not occurred yet. They will happen before the NBA draft lottery, so we'll have a better idea of that. Maybe I'll make a video when that comes out to better educate and inform everyone, so make sure you guys are subscribed for that. And remember, the other team that loses that tiebreaker would go down to 60, 45, 30 for Dallas. They're that 3% chance, 20 combinations for whoever wins the tiebreaker between OKC and Chicago, 15 for the other, and then 8 for that bottom team, and then 7 for New Orleans. So again, depending on the tiebreaker, that will shake up some things there too at the bottom. But that gives us a total of 1,000 combinations. Plus, then you add in that one null combination. There's our 1,001 combinations that the NBA will use. Remember, the asterisk there next to some of those numbers denotes tiebreakers being resolved, which at this point they are not, because I'm recording this right after the season has ended. So let's go back to the 2022 draft odds, and look, Houston had the best odds, tied with Orlando and Detroit. OKC had the 4th best odds, Indiana 5, Portland 6, Sacramento 7. Please remember this, Sacramento 7. It's very, very important to remember, because the 7th overall pick is really where you want to be with the way that the lottery has seemingly worked since the lottery rule changes. The Lakers, Spurs, Washington, New Orleans, New York, Atlanta, Charlotte, the list goes on. The final order, how it ended up, Orlando moved up from 2 to number 1. OKC moved up from 4 to number 2. Houston moved down from number 1 down to number 3. At 4, Sacramento moved up from number 7. So far, number 7's been the sweet spot. If you had the 7th best odds, you've moved up pretty much every single year. And notice these teams toward the bottom. Let's look at, for example, Washington from 2022. They actually had a 4% chance to move up to number 4 compared to the 3% chance they had to move up to number 1. So if your team does happen to jump up in the lottery, it's very likely that they're picking 3 or 4 instead of 1 or 2, because the odds are just better. Now, there's no guarantee of that, right? Think back to when Memphis jumped up to number 2. They were at number 7. Another example of that number 7 spot being a real sweet spot to jump up in the lottery. 7 typically always jumps up. And remember, this year we have a tie between Washington and Indiana for that spot. So whoever gets that 7th best odds, I think, is going to be a team that's going to move up in this year's lottery as well. That's all figurative. I don't have proof that that's going to happen. But it's happened every single time so far. So I think it's pretty safe. And then number 5, Detroit. Notice they were the only team in the top 4 that did not stay in the top 4 through the lottery. So by default, they were the team with the worst record still remaining. They picked 5th, and then Indiana had the next worst record. They picked 6th, so on and so forth down the line. I think seeing this should help you guys rationalize and understand that this is how it functions, this is how it works, and from there, everything should be crystal clear for you. If you have any questions, just ask in the comment section too. I read every comment. I'll be answering your questions, so make sure to leave them down there. Let's talk about the actual process now. How are the ping pong balls selected? First off, all 14 balls, remember, labeled numbers 1 through 14, are placed in the lottery machine. Secondly, the balls are mixed for 20 seconds. You see it, the balls are pushed up by air, they're floating in that little ball collector machine. And then an independent timekeeper, does not work for the NBA, does not work for any teams. An independent timekeeper signals for the ball to be drawn. The person drawing the ball cannot see the balls. Ball number 1 is then drawn. Step number 4, 10 more seconds of mixing. Ball number 2 is then drawn. So for example, step number 3, it could have drawn ball number 7. And then step number 5, where ball number 2 is drawn, could be number 1, right? Step number 6 here, 10 more seconds of mixing. Ball number 3 is then drawn. Step 8, 10 more seconds of mixing. So this is a pretty methodical, slow process. The balls are mixed for roughly about 50 seconds before the completion of a draw in totality. And then step 9, ball number 4 is drawn. At this point, you check the combinations and you put them in order, ball 1, 2, 3, 4 in order, and that could be a combination. This would reward pick number 1 to the team that has that combination. Let's go back to our example. 1, 12, 7, 3 was the Indiana Pacers in our example earlier. Maybe it was 5, 12, 7, 3. I don't exactly remember, but you get my point here. That would reward the Indiana Pacers with the first overall pick in that example. But remember, there's that one null combination. So if the null combo is drawn at any point, you restart and you would repeat the entire process. Number 12, this is the final step. After you've drawn for pick number 1, you would repeat the entire process again for picks 2, 3, and 4. If the same team is drawn, discard. So then you go on until you get to a second team. So for example, Rockets 1, Spurs 2, 3 would be the Pacers, and maybe 4 is the Hornets. Something along those lines, right? Those are just examples off my head. Obviously people are going to say I'm speaking karma into the air, whatever, but that's the process. This is how it works. If you have questions, please let me know in the comment section. But this is how the NBA draws the ping pong balls. This is how the combinations are decided, and this is how teams land the first, second, third, or fourth overall pick in the NBA draft each and every year. Let's look at the Pistons odds one more time, just so everyone can be clear on this. First pick, 14% chance. Second pick, a 13.4% chance. 134 combinations out of 1,000. Third pick, 12.7% chance. Fourth pick, 11.9% chance. And the fifth pick, a 47.9% chance. Picks 6 through 14 are impossible because the Pistons have the worst record. Top 4 picks are done through the lottery. Pick number 5 is the lowest possible selection that Detroit could have this season. Hopefully this all makes sense. Again, if you have questions, please ask them down in the comment section. I will be answering any and all questions, so make sure to leave your thoughts there. Let me know what you think about this draft lottery process as well. Thank you again so much for watching. Like I said, this video is always so much fun to record. We're going to do a lot of draft stuff this year, mock drafts, lottery sims, that and everything else. So make sure you guys check out all of those videos on the channel. We'll also have some prospect breakdowns. So I'm sure a lot of you are interested in learning more about players like Grady Dick, Victor Wembanyama, Scoot Henderson. We have those up on the channel, so make sure you go check those out as well. Thanks again so much for watching, guys, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.